A lot of people love Pulp Fiction, and for good reason too. There aren't many movies that have had a cultural impact, an impact on filmmaking and filmmaking techniques, at least to the level of Pulp Fiction. I want to look at this movie from 3 different perspectives: the structure, the characters, and the dialogue. But to start off with the structure. Part of why this movie is so beloved is that it is always going to keep you on your toes. This isn't a movie that you can slack off to. In fact, it requires your complete attention. The movie uses a non-linear timeline to help tell its story, going from one crazy event to the next. But when you break it down, the narrative structure is actually pretty standard. In real time, there are 3 different stories that are told: Jules and Vincent, Vincent and Mia, and Butch. A 4th story of Pumpkin and Honey Bunny is later added to the narrative of Jules and Vincent, but there's going to be a little bit more on this later. But the order in which the film tells this story is much more confusing. We open with the restaurant robbers, then go back to Jules and Vincent, then jump ahead even more to later in the Jules and Vincent story, then go back to Mia and Vincent, then tell the Butch story, before returning to Jules and Vincent as they catch up with the restaurant robbers. Now, undeniably, seeing this for the first time can be confusing, especially if you go in not knowing what to expect. However, the way that this film is structured is also integral to the flow of the narrative and the introduction to key events. Let me explain. At the very end of the movie, we learn that this is a story about redemption, about someone who has done bad things, who then decides to do good things. After we see this, it lets us make connections. It lets us reflect on what we've already seen. We already know that Vincent dies and Jules lives, and in hindsight, we are able to realize it is because Jules decided to leave his life as a gangster behind. This becomes even more interesting when you look at the story of Butch. Butch is introduced as a washed-up boxer who only has a few fights left in him. Marcellus offers him the way out to fake the fight and reap the rewards. This would be morally wrong, so instead he chooses to stand up for himself, go against the crime boss, and do what he wants to do, and which he knows is right, which is to fight and to win. I'll be discussing this a little bit later. These ideas that are present early in the film have somewhat ambiguous meanings. It is somewhat hard to realize what they all have in common. Sure, they definitely share a few characters, but the real connection isn't a literal one, but instead a thematic one, which is the idea of redemption. At the beginning of the movie, it appears to be a soft, moist, shapeless mass of matter, but by the end of the movie, it all becomes clear.
Come on, let's get in character.
If you're wondering what makes Pulp Fiction so beloved and so classic, look no further than the characters. These characters look like they are completely unrelatable. They are gangsters, murderers, and drug addicts. Normally, a lot of people would want nothing to do with these people. But we don't just see the seedy underbelly of crime. We see real conversations, we see real people. Let's take a closer look at the few of the main characters to look at morality, character arcs, and of course, as aforementioned, redemption. I want to start off by looking at Jules, because despite him not being the character with the most screen time, I feel like his character is the most important when exploring the different themes that are present in this movie. He has the biggest character arc and goes through the most development. Jules is the professional criminal. He takes his job seriously, he is good at it, and is able to succeed in what he does, whereas his counterparts fail on almost all levels. Jules is someone who seeks something more in life. He wants to be able to try new things, and isn't satisfied with where his life is going. Once he is shot at and somehow manages to survive, he takes this as a warning. He suspects religion has something to do with it. Regardless of what you think of this, he got out at the right time. He's able to move on to doing something more with his life. Maybe had he not left, he would have taken Vincent's spot and suffered a similar fate. Vincent, however, is the direct opposite of Jules. He is someone who doesn't take his job seriously, cracking jokes, using drugs, and not taking the situation at all seriously. At the same time, he is still a professional. He may do things his way, but he still does them. He does this job or his life is at risk. Marcellus trusts him enough to take his wife out to dinner before he dies on the job. Throughout the film, it becomes obvious that Vincent takes things as they are. When problems arise, he goes to fix them. He doesn't think of this incident as a magical or spiritual moment, he just thinks of it as them getting lucky. This of course leads to his death, but it becomes clear that at least to him, he would rather stick to what he believes in and die than uproot his life and change who he really is. Mia is someone who goes through life without a worry or a care. She married someone who is able to protect her and uses this freedom to play with fire, so to speak, using drugs and flirting with Vincent after she knows it could get both of them in trouble. She faces her punishment after overdosing, but the main theme of this movie is redemption, and I feel like with her character, it's really important to wonder if she will be redeemed. Will her character continue to go through life recklessly, or will she take this as a warning to try and fix her life? It's entirely up to interpretation and worldview, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this down in the comments. Butch, on the other hand, is actually one of the most noble characters in the film. In his life, he cares about a few things above all else. The most important of these would be his family's legacy. He cares enough about his father to risk his own life over his father's watch. He wants to fight his hardest so that his legacy isn't tarnished. At the same time, he is also one of the hardest characters to relate to. His character keeps to himself and is hard to relate to. His struggles aren't universal, and his character is primarily self-driven. He is defined by pushing himself to be his best, no matter what risk is involved, which is a direct contrast to most other characters in this film. Pumpkin and Honey Bunny are some of the most important characters in the story. They open the narrative up and close it as well. When the film opens up, we see them attempting to rob a small cafe. This really allows the audience to sink into the narrative. You've heard stories about armed robbery before, whereas stories that say hit into the public like organized crime don't seem as normal. However, by the end of the movie, their crime seems almost normal when you compare armed robbery to all these murders that we have seen. It isn't as bad. The audience perspective has changed about them from the opening to the closing. At the same time, there is a case of dramatic irony. By the end of the movie, the audience knows that these characters are cold-blooded killers. On any other day before this, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny would be dead. But we as the audience are able to see how lucky they are that not only did they live, but they also got the money. But I want to end this video by saying something about dialogue, because it really is the foundation and lifeblood of this entire movie. The dialogue is fantastic, and that is because of its purpose. The dialogue isn't here to progress the story, it is there to make the characters feel relatable. The conversations are authentic, it seems like something you would talk about with a friend. It makes it feel like you are one of the friends. This leads us to want to see what happens next. From the opening scene, we know that this is a dangerous movie, people are killed, and we need to see what happens to these characters that we have really grown fond of. That is what is so great about the dialogue in this movie. It places us in with the characters. We are watching to see these relationships expand, all the while being taken for a joyride in the crazy world of Pulp Fiction. Thank you so much for watching. It was a lot of fun talking about Pulp Fiction. I haven't talked about it in a long time, and I'm glad to finally cover it in this series. Next week, we are going to be looking at The Incredibles. That video is going to be released next Saturday and is linked on the right of the screen. On the left is my last video about Gone Girl. Make sure you check that out if you haven't seen it yet, and as always, be sure to check out movierehab.com. Thanks for watching.